This is a call to order to the Max Street Committee of July 14, 2020. Good afternoon, members of the Max Street Committee. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping items. The quorum required is at all times to conduct the meeting. For today's meeting, the quorum requirement is 14 members. Please remember to unmute and identify yourself when you're speaking, and keep yourself on mute when you're listening and not speaking. A roll call vote will be taken for each action item on the agenda. We will also do a roll call when we're introducing ourselves and who's in attendance. That will be done by Steve Tate. So let's begin with introductions and attendance. Steve?
Okay, I'm going to read off a roll call. So please answer yes after each name. Grant Anderson.
Here.
Charles Andrews. Okay, I'm going down to the next one. John Kraft. Okay, going down to Hugh Biak.
Yes.
Okay, Bryce Crystal.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, the chair is here. David Fabiano.
Yes.
Angela Horn.
Yes.
Jennifer Jack.
Yes.
David Janover.
Yes.
Kevin Lair. Okay. Arian Larange. I don't think he's going to attend. Paul Lopez. Jamie McCracken.
Gabriel Elias for Jamie McCracken.
Gabriel, okay. Okay. Wait a second. Bottom of the list. Steve O'Brien. Okay. Timothy Oliver.
I couldn't get it to work, but so you can either come in here.
Okay. David Oceani. David, I'm sorry.
Hi.
David Oceani.
Thanks, Steve. Get my name right.
Sorry
I'm
about
here.
Okay, I'm sorry, this is the person I'm probably going to really wipe out their name. Herman Piedrahada? Piedrahada? Herman?
Hello.
Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm sorry, I really wiped out your name. Okay, Patrick Sage?
Here.
Okay. Chris Salas?
Present.
Thank you. Emil Schmidt?
Here.
Brett Skoglund? Okay. David Smith?
Present.
Okay. Brandon Squire? Okay. Leticia Vargas?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Marshall Regal?
Present.
Okay. So is there anyone that I failed to call?
Kevin Lair.
Kevin, okay.
Thank you.
Arian Larange, Federal Highways here.
Oh, okay, Ariane. Anyone else that I forget to call? Okay. So we should have a quorum. That's it.
Madam Chair, we do have quorum.
Thank you. Let's go to item number 3. That is the approval of the February 11th, 2020 meeting minutes. Does any member of the committee have any questions before I request a motion for approval? Hearing none, we have to do a roll call vote to be taken on this action item. Steve, would you do this again?
I'll do it again. I'm going to skip over the people who didn't say they were here. Okay, I'm going to start with Grant Anderson.
Aye.
Excuse me, Steve, Maria, Madam Chair, point of order, were you asking for a motion for
Oh,
approval?
you're right.
Yes, a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Grant.
I'm sorry, but who was the second?
Grant Anderson.
Oh, Grant. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start the roll call again, if that's okay. Grant Anderson.
Aye.
Not Charles, he's not here. John Kraft, not here. Sorry about that. Hugh Biak.
I'm here. Yes. Yay.
Okay. Bryce Crystal.
Aye.
Maria Deeb.
Aye.
David Fabiano.
Aye.
Angela Horn.
Aye.
Jennifer Jack. Okay. David Janover.
Aye.
Kevin Lair.
Aye.
Okay. Ariane Larange. Okay. Paul Lopez isn't here. Gabriel Elias.
Steve Tate.
Aye.
This is Paul.
Aye.
Aye.
You are here? Okay. Do you vote yay for the minutes?
Aye.
Okay. Gabriel Elias.
Aye.
Do not have Steve O'Brien. Do not have Tim Oliver. Dana Oceani.
Aye.
Herman.
Aye.
Thank you.
You.
Patrick Sage.
Aye.
Chris Salas.
Aye.
Emil Smid.
Aye.
We don't have Brett Skoglund. David Smith.
Aye.
We don't have Brandon Squire. Leticia Vargas.
Aye. Aye.
And finally, we have Marshall Regal.
Aye.
Okay. I had two people not voting. One was Jennifer Jack. Jennifer, you here?
Sorry, I stepped away for a moment. I approve.
Okay. And the other person was Ariane. Are you abstaining, Ariane? Okay, I'm going to put down not voting.
Hey, Steve, can you not
Yeah.
hear me? This is Tim Oliver.
Yeah. Oh, you're here. Okay.
Yeah, and I approve. Sorry.
Okay. You got Tim. Okay. Then the motion passes.
Thank you very much. Let's go to agenda item number 3. That is a call to the audience. This is members of the public were invited to submit written comments related to this meeting at azmag.gov comment within 1 hour of the posted start meeting of the minutes. To my knowledge, staff did not receive any comments. Are we correct with that, Steve?
That is correct.
Okay. Let's continue with agenda item number 5. That is the transportation manager's report. Mr. John Bullen, that is MAG Transportation Programming and Finance Manager, will provide the report. John?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the street committee. Happy to be joining you today. It's been quite some time since we last met, so good to catch up. Real quick, we do have a call for projects that's scheduled coming up. I won't go into detail given that it's agendized a little bit later today. One of the items not on there, however, is the SM&O. That will take place sometime late winter, early spring of 2021. So as we get closer, we'll be sure to provide that information. Also, I want to cover briefly some MAG staffing changes. For those of you that have not heard, Terry Kennedy left MAG back in March, so we wish her well. There's been several changes internally at MAG. Programming activities have been merged with Prop 400 programs under the Economic and Finance Group. I am pleased to announce, however, that we do have a new TIP supervisor that will be joining MAG here in a few weeks. Patrick Stone from ADOT will be joining us on July 27th. So very excited for Patrick to join us. He comes with a wealth of experience, knows federal funding inside and out, true problem solver. So Patrick will help the region sort of advance TIP and programming activities to that next level. So very excited for that. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, John, and congratulations, Patrick. Item number 6, that is the Regional Transportation Plan update. Ms. Audra Custer-Thomas, MAG Transportation Planning Program Manager, will provide the update. Audra?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Street Committee. Pleased to be with you. I believe I was with you in the early part of the year. I'm happy here today to present an update associated with the myriad of activities on the development of the next Regional Transportation Plan and the extension of Proposition 400. Next slide. Next slide. So I want to orient you here to a few of the key activities that are underway. I want to underscore we have a lot of concurrent activity. I'm going to hit some highlights for you today. I'm cognizant of your long agenda as well. Happy to entertain some questions here at the end, but of course I'm always available offline for those of you who may have more detailed questions. This will also kind of follow a bit of the presentation I'll provide today. I'll give a bit of a public involvement update, a little unique given our current pandemic, but give some updates on our messaging and branding as well as website, and then focus a little bit on the data side and activities associated with development of our needs catalog. I will provide an update on the RTP call for projects, which many of you, of course, from a member agency perspective, were involved in earlier this year, but also cognizant that as we're evaluating the potential projects and programs that we want to deliver with the next Regional Transportation Plan and extension of Proposition 400, we're mindful that it's not just the call for project submissions that you all provided. We have a number of deferred projects coming out of the Proposition 400 era programs, but also many studied and otherwise unfunded needs. So I'll give you a little bit of an high-level overview of not only what we received with the call for projects, but then also how that fits in the context of program delivery for Proposition 400 and some sketch estimates of where we stand. And then I'll touch at the end of our presentation on the initial work we're doing with the performance-based evaluation framework. So specifically introducing our regional vision and goals associated with the RTP, as well as regional significance definitions. Next slide. So public engagement, next slide. Want to introduce our brand for the RTP. We're going with Momentum. We used fantastic consulting resources that are much more sophisticated than I am in this area with expertise. And you'll see the word here, Momentum, we're using as the name of the plan. It really, in part, is intended to give a nod to, acknowledge the unique legacy of local investment in this region that we, in '85, mustered together a sales tax, one of the first in the country, to deliver important transportation investments that federal funding was otherwise insufficient for, and we were fast growing, as you are all aware. We want to give homage to that, recognizing that our work yet is not done and that we have good work still ahead. And so you'll see we're using momentum and a bit of a fresh color palette as well. Next slide. We're also aiming this month, you'll have hot off the press here an image of our website, and excited about engaging with the public through this forum. We're using this not only as an information tool, in part doing a better job, maybe telling a little bit of our story, talking about how important Proposition 300 and 400 have been to really the success and prosperity of this region, but also as an engagement tool. As part of the initial construction of this work, we had really identified a lot of opportunities to use social media, imagined we'd do more virtual engagement, not knowing that we'd be in a pandemic where that was going to be extremely important. So we'll be using this website in a variety of ways to engage with the public, get their feedback as we move through this next 2 years worth of a plan development effort. Next slide. So like I indicated, wanted to give you a little update on the call for projects. Many of you are very intimately familiar from your member agency's standpoint of this work earlier this year. Next slide. But I first want to start off with just reminding us that while at MAG, we really tend to focus on these 3 life cycle programs. The Freeway Life Cycle Program, those of you who may be involved in some transit work over at Valley Metro, the Transit Life Cycle Program, and then of course the Arterial Life Cycle Program. While these 3 feature life cycle programs make up over 95% of Proposition 400 era programs, they are not the only kinds of investments we make in this region. And just as a friendly reminder, and you'll talk about it later in today's agenda as well, you are all familiar with several regionally significant programs that, while they represent smaller suites of projects or more localized improvements, taken as a whole represent a regionally significant investment. And so just to remind ourselves that not only do we have these 3 mainly capital focused investment plans, we also have a variety of smaller regionally significant programs. And as you will see, we anticipate, not just based on the call for projects, but just by the maturity of our region, the number of programs as we look into the next RTP actually to grow. Next slide. So we issued the call for projects at the direction of Regional Council at the beginning of the year, just after the first of the year. We had given about a 3-month timeline. You all feverishly worked. We ended up on the eve of the pandemic extending the timeline through middle of April. And when all said and was done, we received almost 1,300 individual project and program submissions from member agencies. You'll see here a pie chart that talks a little bit about the composition of what we received in the major modal categories. But what I want to do, next slide, is talk a little bit about really the composition of the kinds of projects. And I'm going to specifically focus on ones that this committee perhaps has a little bit more interest in. You'll see once we've had a chance now to take a look at the data, the rich amount of data that we received, we could characterize the submissions in about 15 different buckets, if you will, kinds of projects and programs that were submitted. I'm going to go through those that are bolded or highlighted, again, more germane to the interests of this committee, but know that there is a significant number of projects outside those for which we won't necessarily touch on in specific today. Next slide. No surprise, we received significant freeway, highway, and parkway projects. Again, not just new facilities, but I think unique again to the development pattern for which we are now in. It's not just capacity adding, it's the recognition that we have to improve, modify, modernize the existing infrastructure for which was made in this region. And so this is not just new freeways and highways, but a significant number of modifications, TIs actually, number of TIs came in as part of this bucket. Next slide. Arterial roadway capital, no surprise to us, we received a significant number of projects, not just new facilities, but capacity improvements to existing arterials, and again, modernization and reconstruction. Next slide. Many arterial intersection improvements focused on capital, but you'll see here also included are ITS and safety improvements. And I'll just, as a note, you'll see safety asterisks. That's really a common thread amongst a lot of these different buckets, that safety continues to be an identification for needs that really spread across several of these buckets. Next slide. And then kind of a collection of other roadway kinds of projects. So we didn't just receive arterial and up, we received local collector and even smaller street improvement suggestions. A lot of focus on bridges, whether they're new river crossings, a lot of railroad crossings of focus, roundabouts, complete streets concepts, turnbacks for ADOT, and then safety improvements again here. Next slide. Pavement preservation. We expected and member agencies delivered. We know that this is a top of mind issue for our member agencies. You know, the diminishing return on the Highway User Revenue Fund isn't just a concern of ADOT's in their statewide responsibilities. As you know, it's an important funding tool for your own local maintenance and preservation needs. And that diminishing return has an impact at cities level as well. And we saw a considerable amount of pavement preservation requests coming in, largely from a programmatic perspective, not just isolated to arterials either. In some cases, full sweeps of pavement preservation across infrastructure. Next slide. Planning and support, continued investment, of course, in our good studies and the important work that is underway. Traffic counts, recognition that that's an important component, an important tool for our planning work across the region. And then federal administrative and management support there. Next slide. And then a category that we're using kind of as an other, it's a collection of a variety of things that don't otherwise fit in the other 14 buckets. We received requests for local street sign replacements, traffic signals and replacements, conversion of street lights to LED, electric vehicle charging infrastructure locally, utility relocations, public art maintenance, a landscape beautification, tree replacement. So kind of a variety of things that fall under this category that don't neatly fit into any of the other 14. Next slide. Important, I wanted to point out of things that we didn't receive. In top of this list here, air quality programs. Again, we'll talk about this later in your agenda. But because we're in a non-attainment area, it's really important to remember that the region is committed to and will be committed to continuing, if not expanding, a variety of mitigation investments and measures in order to ensure that federal funding continues to flow into our region. We did not see acknowledgement of street sweepers or kind of the ride share components, for which are important policy decisions that we have already and will need to continue to make. I will acknowledge, because I know Mr. Oliver is on the call, besides the Gila River Indian community, did not see paving of unpaved roads come through the call for projects. Again, that's another one of our mitigation measures here in this region. We also didn't see any FMS or large-scale technology, although we recognize and we certainly hear from our member agencies the value of those kinds of investments, and certainly have continued conversations about ensuring there's space available in the RTP moving forward. Next slide. So as I promised, we provided some updated sketch estimates now based on this call for projects information, in addition to what we already knew coming out of deferred programming investments as well as studied need. Next slide. Again, just some methodology and really, if anything, just caveats about the next slide. This is intended really to show order of magnitude, in part to really demonstrate we're not starting fresh as we move into this next RTP, as we move into the extension of Proposition 400. We come not only with a bucket, if you will, of deferred projects for which we were unable and will be unable to deliver out of Proposition 400, but also ongoing commitments, notably expectation that a continuation, if not expansion, of operations, in this case specifically bus transit operations, will be a commitment coming out of our sales tax and the RTP in general. So this is intended really to provide a high level analysis and really highlight the difficult conversations we're going to have in trade-offs. We're not going to be able to deliver everything, and of anything we know, our need greatly outweighs the available amount of funding. So consider this as an opportunity just to better understand the challenges ahead. Couple other notes from the call for projects. Only about half of the projects submitted actually had estimates assigned with them. The estimates that came in are kind of all over the place, so we're going to have to really normalize some of those estimates and then apply, of course, a scale and timing associated with them. And really, this is intended largely to identify kind of submission concepts, and again, not a minute or anything fine-tuned in terms of estimates. Next slide. And what you'll see here is an update to some estimates that we did provide our policy committees at the end of last year as we started conversations about enabling legislation for the extension of Proposition 400. Those in red are updated figures from last fall, and I'll cut to the chase and give you the conclusion. On the left side of your screen, you will see kind of the updated cost estimates that are inclusive of deferred projects out of Proposition 400, projects that have been studied and we know that there is need for, and of course now inclusive of the call for projects for which you submitted. And you'll see here across a bunch of different categories, we're looking between $60 and $90 billion worth of need. A couple caveats. We're using just an estimate right now for bus transit operations. That was based on some work we did with Valley Metro and Phoenix last year to better understand maybe where we sit in terms of continued bus operations in particular. I can tell you that the call for projects submitted a more robust amount of transit than that exercise. However, that is a really delicate and very nuanced process, and we're working right now with Valley Metro to take a little bit more of a service planning approach, not only to better understand the composition of those submissions, but really what that expresses in terms of both capital and operation costs. On the right side of the screen, you'll see estimates for revenue. And here you'll see we're looking between $30 and $35 billion. A note that there's some flexibility in the potential transit discretionary funding assigned to our big capital and fixed guideway transit investments, notably in this region, how we've helped deliver our light rail. That federal discretionary money is competitive nationwide. There's a couple billion available each year. We have to compete against all other national projects for that funding, and that can be expressed by the quality of some of those projects, flexible in how much high capacity there is, but I can tell you that not only did we see light rail extensions submitted as part of the call, many streetcars were submitted across the region as well. So we'll have to better evaluate that looking forward. But what you see here is we have some tough conversations. We are really going to have to better identify and decide what our highest priorities are in the region, because you see a large gap between available resources and the amount of need that exists in this region. Next slide. So let's move to our performance-based evaluation. What are we going to do? We have a bunch of projects. We have a bunch of ideas. We have a lot of need, but we have a limited amount of funding, and we have to deliver a fiscally constrained plan and program. So we're starting from the beginning. Those of you familiar with your own local planning processes know you start with goals and vision and what you really want to deliver for an outcome. Next slide. We've worked through our policy committee process to identify a vision to develop the regional transportation plan around. You'll see here our intent to establish a sustainable, resilient, multimodal transportation plan, wanting to execute and deliver on a region that will prosper and thrive. You'll note language in here that we're challenging ourselves to deliver a world-class transportation system. This metropolitan region is certainly growing to be one of the largest, and we want to catch up with our peers across the world in terms of the system for which we should be delivering. Next slide. This is really where we start to operationalize that work. You'll see 6 goals here. Safety at the top of the list across users, specific notation of pedestrians and bicyclists in this definition, recognition of a top of mind issue here in this region. Prosperity, wanting to ensure that we're supporting economic competitiveness and growth. Responsiveness, acknowledging that we want to provide travel choices that are flexible and able to accommodate innovation in the future, something really of importance when we look forward. Livability. This is nesting our public health and happiness aspects, of course, as well as environmental sustainability. Preservation, acknowledging that we've invested over 10 billion already in a system, that we want to ensure that we maintain that investment moving forward. And then finally, mobility, that we want to move people and goods across the region efficiently and effectively, providing access to services and destinations. Next slide. You'll see that these 6 goals align very well with current federal guidance in terms of how our funding programs, half of our funding comes through the federal formula funding program. You'll see a lot of alignment here with those 6 goals that we've worked through our policy committee process through. Next slide. And then finally, regional significance definitions, a really important part to starting to identify what we'll be able to deliver, quintessential really to the development of a regional transportation plan and our federal requirements for delivering a long-range plan to discern where federal funding goes. But in this region, of course, inclusive of our half-cent sales tax. A really significant note I would make here is that one of the things and pieces of feedback we received from our member agencies as we initiated the RTP process was a desire to have a more robust definition. People wanted to better understand what is and isn't included in the RTP and why. And so this effort, not easy by any stretch of the imagination, was really important to helping bring along our member agencies and better setting expectations in terms of the composition of what the RTP would include. Next slide. So we used, of course, FHWA's definition to start. That is the requirement for our regional transportation plan. Again, our federal funding is focused and needs to be focused on regional beneficial projects. We also looked at some peers, wanted to see if anyone else had some secret sauce that we can be inspired by. And there isn't a magic wand here. Some of the bigger metropolitan areas, I will say, actually use a very standard regional significance, what's included in the model. So it's either the freeways, highways, and large arterials, in addition to fixed guideway transit. Some others use a threshold of funding. Projects of at least $300,000 or $500,000 are regionally significant. We looked at your submissions. You provided a robust amount of information as part of that. We looked through and identified what was important to you, why you were submitting those projects, and used that to help inform these definitions. And then, of course, most importantly, we guided ourselves by historic precedent and what we've delivered out of Proposition 300 and 400 and the policy guidance provided there. Next slide. And we've come to these 2 regionally significant definitions. I'll note one's for a regionally significant project and another is for a regionally significant program. Regionally significant project, this is the big stuff, the things that you can evaluate independently. Again, the things that are included in our transportation demand model, focused easily on our freeway, highway, and rail kinds of investments, as well as our grid network. Important and unique, perhaps important to us in particular in this region, is this second definition for a regionally significant program. You'll remember how I started today's presentation, reminding us that while we talk a lot at MAG about our freeway lifecycle program and our arterial lifecycle program, we do have several really regionally significant programs, although smaller in size, really deliver on important regionally significant intent. So we've defined a regionally significant program as one that is consistent with the region's values, vision, and achieves a unique or distinct priority shared across the region. One of the ways that we want to use this is acknowledging that the region is extremely diverse. You know, we're the 2nd largest MPO in the country. We have some very rural areas. We have some very dense urban areas. We want to use this as an opportunity to acknowledge the diversity of needs across the region as well, so we can find home for the kind of investments, regional significance across the region, although in perhaps different ways. Next slide. So what's up next? Next slide, just a few highlights here. We're going to launch our website hopefully at the end of this month. We are continuing to compile our needs catalog. I can't underscore the amount of work that's going into this particular component. Not only is it important simply to be able to map and demonstrate how projects submitted as well as deferred projects move through this process, it really is going to be the foundation for program management as we look forward to the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years from now in tracking how we ultimately implement a variety of programs in the future. Applying our performance-based evaluation framework, we're only at the beginning of that work. Our management committee work group rolling up their sleeves, in fact, this month to help look at and see if we have any missing gaps in terms of evaluation criteria or data opportunities. And then ultimately this summer as well, focused on fine-tuning those revenue projections, not just on a localized level in terms of our state funding or our sales tax projections, perhaps more importantly, taking pen to paper on the federal projections. Certainly a lot more risk. There's a lot more politics involved on that side, and really using guidance from our consulting team to help refine our federal funding projections. Next slide. Madam Chair, I believe that does conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Audra, for that great presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Please remember to unmute and state your name, and then if any questions, please address Audra.
Looks like Mr. Fabiano might have a question. He's using the raise his hand feature.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Audra, you had mentioned, I'm trying to make sure I understood this correctly, that about half of the funding that we're looking at is federal funding, and the other half is, I'm assuming, local. Would you mind going back to the slide that showed that revenue side?
Yes, give me a second to, oh, sorry, David, I don't have control, so I'm magically thinking I can, yes, slide 26. Thank you so much, David. So, David, you'll see here, you know, our expected cost estimates on one side, and then the sketch revenue estimates on the other. And you'll see in this region, we have a fairly small number of kinds of resources that we use to deliver our transportation projects. We have assumed a 0.5-cent sales tax, although we're acknowledging that is not going to deliver enough, or at least certainly to meet the needs that have been identified by member agencies. And you'll see then here both ADOT federal funding coming through, as well as state HERF proportion, as well as MAG federal funding formula that comes through to our region, plus the discretionary transit number at, you know, $2 billion or so. You know, I'll defer to my funding expert, Mr. Bullen, for more specificity, but this is a really important point, and I'm glad you've asked the question. I'm not certain that there is a good understanding just of the composite of funding used to deliver our regional transportation network. So, Mr. Bullen, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Fabiano. Happy to jump in on this. And actually, we'll be touching on this a little bit as part of the ALCP status report agenda item. But this is something that we continue to work through with our policymakers. As you know, when we had originally put together the Proposition 400 program itself, we actually put all the revenues on the table. And so when folks traditionally think of the freeway lifecycle program or the arterial lifecycle program, for one reason or another, they tend to focus just on the Prop 400, the 0.5-cent sales tax element. When in actuality, all of these programs actually had an assumption of additional funding sources built in. And over time, we've leveraged those additional funding sources. So where we currently stand in terms of the freeway program, we're just over half funded through the 0.5-cent sales tax, while a little bit over a third is funded through federal transportation revenues, and then the balance is with HERF. And so, you know, if we were to have just used the 0.5-cent sales tax, our system would look remarkably different than it does today. And actually using these multiple revenue streams lets us diversify our risk a little bit. So, you know, as we're wading through the COVID crisis now and we really see the HERF revenues drop off, RARF is doing okay, and then federal, of course, coming in strong. So it's real advantageous from that perspective. And then, of course, this committee is familiar with the ALCP, of which right now is about half federally funded, half funded through the sales tax. So every year, Kristen and Ormenta go through this delicate dance where they work with member agencies, try and identify projects where we can, allocate the federal funding in the program on so as to reduce the administrative burden. But in itself, the ALCP could not be delivered without that federal funding component. And this is something that we continue to talk to our policymakers about. This is actually a really good opportunity to message with you all who are on the front lines of program delivery. And we're certainly open to suggestions, looking for help delivering that message upwards and how we can fully articulate it. Because I think, over time, we tend to really focus on the half-cent sales tax, but the funding composition is much more important than that, and we would not be where we are today without it. And we are going to be tremendously dependent on it going forward, too.
Yep. Thank you, John. Thank you, Audra. Madam Chair. John, if you could, this is something that I'm just kind of been wrestling with, and I don't know the answer, and I don't know that anyone does, is to looking at that, the HERF side of the world, and where the state of Arizona is at with the levy that exists for the HERF, for the user revenue that happens there, versus where it probably ought to be. And there's a huge vulnerability that it's probably the 1,600-pound gorilla in the middle of the room that none of us ever talk about. And I don't know if we've done any kind of sensitivity or analysis to really, let's talk about what the underinvestment by the state in the state's responsibility and how that has bled over into the local jurisdictions and our ability to adequately meet the needs of our communities with the tools that we have available, because the state collects it for us and we only get a piece of it, and it's not enough to do what we need to do. So that's a theme that I know exists. I know we've sort of talked about it on the water cooler. Has it ever been formalized and to look at that more in depth?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fabiano, if I could, that's actually one of our favorite talking points. So I'd certainly be happy to come back to this committee and have all sorts of fun facts and figures. In fact, I spent a good chunk of my morning dwelling on that subject itself with Ashley. But yeah, certainly the HERF revenue, it's an issue. The state has not touched the gas tax since 1991. If you normalize for inflation, taking into account inflation, we actually collected less in 2019 than we did in 2000, despite the fact that the state's population has grown by more than 40%. And so ADOT's feeling it. You all are feeling it. I think a common talking point Audra and I have had with the management working group and our other policymakers is that you see a high number of submissions here for arterials, and that's in part driven because you all are feeling the pinch of HERF. And so it has this cascade effect where you have to allocate additional resources into pavement preservation. So those capital projects that you need to do that you would have otherwise done with local funds, all of a sudden you're looking for regional funds. So at the end of the day, we don't have enough investment in transportation. And I think the state legislature shares a great deal of the blame. So sorry, Audra, I'll turn it back over if you have any other points.
No, that's a virtual high five from me. So yeah, it's a David, you bring up such a great point. In fact, we're actually working on really better articulating the composition of underinvestment. So when you look at our peers across the country, the major metropolitan areas across the country, I think we have delivered a significant amount of transportation investment, and we should be so prideful in it. However, when you look at how much revenue is being placed into systems in our peer regions, we are really underfunding transportation. And one of the reasons we haven't yet felt it as much of a pinch is because we've been strictly in a capacity building mode, right? It recognizes that our region is very young relative to other places across the country. No longer the case. We continue to be the fastest growing city, county, region, local community, you name it. We continue to be the fastest. and need to continue to invest in capacity. But we also now have the responsibilities of maintenance, rehab, and preservation on the deck, and we're feeling the pinch. And so we're going to pull together some peer region information to better articulate, while we have made great investment here, comparatively, we're putting less revenue, we're putting less funding into a multimodal transportation system than our peers.
Thank you, Audra. Thank you, John. I do have a question. As an MPO, have you reached out to other Arizona MPOs or COGs and maybe together talk to our state legislature, not just as a MAC, but maybe all together, all the MPOs and COGs of the state?
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, yes, this is a top of mind issue of our policymakers in particular. They have given direction to ensure that we continue constructive conversations, particularly with the state legislature. There was an effort last fall, earlier this year, and again last year as well, to do a substantive investment and to fix, if you will, the gas tax issue. We started off the year strong, and that included conversations that we participated in, testified in. Ultimately, because of a variety of reasons, those conversations haven't moved forward. And despite Republican Mr. Campbell carrying that bill, we have not been able to get it out of committee. Again, our current pandemic shut down a variety of conversations, really all legislative activity in one way, shape, or form, and ultimately condensed our legislative session this year. But I would say if things that there's a unified conversation, a unified front for, it's this in particular, and you see it being demonstrated in testimony in front of committees at the legislature. Yet we still don't see action.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Grant.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think this page that David pointed out with all the revenues on it and the expense, estimated expenses, I do believe it looks like it's a 25-year total versus yearly. But secondly, we could expand that right-hand side, which tells you where the funds are to come from, to show how our current system would be utilized to pay for the projects on the left-hand side. You could better understand where the shortfalls are, because if you look at it directly right now, you see that the ADOT funds are enough to pay totally for the computer rail, but that's not where they go. So I think, you know, if you look at that and break the right-hand side down into the areas where the left-hand side goes or wants to go, then you'll see how much shortfall there is. And then also maybe put in there on that same page where those projects are funded from, like the freeway OM, the bus transit. Where are they funded from? It would give a better picture of where all the shortfalls are, with ability to talk to others to say, look, we're really short in this one, this one, this one, and this one. And these are our project needs, and we really need to have a better discussion about that.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Anderson, members of Street Committee. Yeah, that'll be our next step. This was really intended to be just a high-level overview to demonstrate we have a lot of need and not a lot of funding. Part of what you observe is an outcome of policy decisions of what we want to fund, what we can fund, and not until we make some of those decisions will we be able to align those funding resources ultimately to a specific suite or type of project. And so we're a little ahead, or we're working our way there, Mr. Anderson, and that will be an important conversation where we'll do a little bit better work on the depiction here as we move into our performance-based evaluation, where we not only see the highest performing projects, but then identify the potential suites of packages that we might be able to deliver. Because one of the things we want to evaluate is whether or not, or what we could potentially get if we change or augment revenue sources. And that includes consideration of more than 1/2 cent. And I think our member agencies have asked for, and we need to deliver the information about what exactly more could we deliver if we augment those revenue sources, including the traditional 1/2 cent sales tax, so that we can weigh the trade-offs and whether or not that is an important consideration we need to entertain with the public.
Thank you, Audra. Thank you, John. If not, any more questions? If not, let's proceed to item number 7.
Madam Chair, in the interest of time, I might suggest that we skip to agenda item number 8, and if we have time, we can come back to agenda item number 7.
Okay, thank you, John. Item number 8, that's the Arterial Life Cycle Program Report, January 20 to June 2020. This item will be introduced by Ms. Arminta Sayed from MAG. Go ahead, Arminta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of MAG Street Committee. My name is Arminta Sayed, and I am a Transportation 2 planner here at MAG. I'm here today to present an overview of our ALCP status report that covers the period from January to June 2020. Next slide, please. So most of you are familiar with our status report process, but just to give you a quick overview so we're all on the same page, our status report is what we use as our financial management tool for our arterial life cycle program. That's guided by our ALCP policies and procedures, which were agreed upon as of June 2015. The status report is published on a semi-annual basis, and we go through and update things such as revenue forecasts, project modifications, things in terms of schedule changes, and of course, adjustments to programmed reimbursements. So speaking of updating revenue forecasts, since this period that I'm covering rounds out the end of fiscal year 2020, we can look at a quick snapshot of year-over-year change, particularly when it comes to sales tax. Small caveat, as particularly emphasized by Audra and John before me, sales tax is not, of course, our only funding source for our ALCP. There are federal funding sources as well, and I will just go over that a little bit later in my presentation. But looking at sales tax collections, if we look at the total collected in FY20 versus FY19, there was about a 5% increase. There was about a negative 1.7 variation in terms of what we projected we'd collect in FY20 versus actuals. But if I can point your attention to the chart that you see in the bottom corner of the slide, you'll see that this negative variance really started around that April-May period, and it's due to the current pandemic situation that we've been facing in the recent months. And just a small caveat that in the attachment that you'll find as part of the mail out package, June 2020 amounts were not yet available. So those amounts are actually not included in that attachment. They are included in the numbers that you see here, and they will be included in the status report that gets published to our website and that goes through the committee process going forward. Next slide, please. So if we look at the status of projects in FY 2020, we had about 47 projects that were scheduled for reimbursement. Of those, 32 were reimbursed for design expenses, 20 for right-of-way, and 23 for construction. Of course, this doesn't equal that 47 total, but that's because the same project may have been reimbursed for multiple work phases. And then I'd also like to point out that 9 projects are scheduled to be open to traffic in calendar year FY20, so as of December 31st, 20. So in FY20, if we look at the funding sources that funded those reimbursements, we were scheduled to have about 134 million reimbursements that would be funded through RARF. Of that, we received about 31 million. And then there was about 37 million that was obligated from federal funding. And of that, we received about 34 million. Next slide, please. So part of pointing out this FY 2020 snapshot is looking ahead at our current ALCP and the current timeline. It's funded right now up until the end of December 31st, 2025. So that's only another 5.5 years. And David, if you can just go to the next slide. On average, a project in the ALCP takes about 4.5 years to complete if local funding is provided up front. So we're really kind of getting close to that timeline. David, next slide, please. So looking at the fund balance over this timeline that I just mentioned, as of this date, we were looking at an ending balance of about 165 million at the end of fiscal year 2020, and we are predicting that we will end the ALCP currently
Here
funded.
for James's bit.
Currently funded program for about 125 million. Next slide. And then lastly, just before I finish up my presentation this afternoon, I wanted to point out that you'll see a new section at the end of your ALCP status report. As mentioned by John, there tends to be sort of this focus on Prop 400 and the state side funding of our arterial life cycle program. But our arterial program would not be where we are today. It was just funded by RARF. So as part of the Prop 400 original initiative, our 2003 regional transportation plan served as the basis for that initiative. And I believe as part of that original plan, we estimated about, and I'm rounding here, about 1.5 billion total revenues available for arterial. At that time, we were predicting that about 58% would come from state, which was that 10.5% of the sales tax allocation that you see. And then about another 42% would come from federal sources. The two sources of federal funding that would be available would be the STBG, which is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program from FHWA, as well as the CMAQ program, this Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program. Because these revenue sources were allocated to our ALCP on a percentage basis, as revenues have fluctuated over time, the amount of funding that has come from the federal and state sources has changed year over year. And I apologize, there's a bit of a small mistake on the graph in front of you. So that should actually show programmed reimbursements, not expenditures. And so in FY 2020, over 51% of programmed reimbursements were actually funded by the two federal sources that you see there. And one small clarification, it says in front of you that 100% of STBGP MAG allocation was allocated to our arterial program. That's actually rounded. It's closer to 9.7%, with that additional percentage going to the Pinal County portion that MAG covers. So that ends my presentation today, and I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could just cut in and follow up with a couple key comments there too. So first, in terms of the overall program fund balance, so just a qualifier that fund balance does include some assumptions, including if we were to permanently defer out program inflation. So we didn't quite end that fund balance quite as high as what she had reported. So wanted to make that note. And then perhaps biggest point of focus, and we've talked about this several times over the last couple of years, we don't have too much time left in Prop 400. So as agencies are working through the projects, as they're thinking about project development, it's important to be mindful of that. There's likely to be some wiggle room, some slack when it comes to the half-cent sales tax funding, acknowledging that projects take a little while to finish off. But our federal funding, including the federal funding that flows to the ALCP, is use it or lose it. So as we're putting together the programs, as we're working on project delivery, just want to hammer home those points. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Minto or John? Hearing none, let's go to item number 9. That is the statewide traffic program. This item will be introduced by Ms. Sage Donaldson from ADOT. Take it away.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much, Madam Chair. So my name is Sage Donaldson. I believe James Meyer, Jonathan Samuelson, and Adam Langford are also on the phone here. And we're just going to give a quick introduction and a discussion on the ADOT statewide traffic data collection program. So Jonathan or James, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you now.
Jim or James Meyer, if you have anything to say, go ahead and interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and jump in.
Hi, this is James Meyer, Mrs. Chair. Just to introduce this project a little bit. If anyone on this call hasn't heard about it yet, ADOT's undertaking this effort to basically look at the statewide traffic program as a whole. Local agencies and state all combined together as far as what the picture of the state of practice is and come up with a plan to do a better job. So without taking up too much of your time, I'd rather have Jonathan go over some of the highlights and get into any question and answers as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great. So just go ahead and take me to the next slide if that's okay. Okay, this web map, we're trying to distribute this URL wherever we can, but this is kind of the punchline of what we're trying to accomplish. This map represents locations where we have raw counts that have been taken within a reasonable length of time, usually in the latest 6 years at least is what's considered current. And then there are a lot of sections where we don't have a traffic count history, a raw traffic count history, or the counts that we do have are old. We've spoken with a lot of the agencies in the MAG region that are represented here in some of these red sections, and we realize that traffic counting efforts are taking place, and a significant portion of the challenge is to get the raw traffic counts loaded to the magtrans.org website. Next slide, please.
How did we get the slides? I don't have them on my screen.
Steve, can we send you a handout that you can email out? Would that be appropriate?
Steve is on mute. We can send that out, yes. Thank you.
I did see him shaking his head yes, though. Yeah, I'm sure Steve will be able to get this out. Anyway, this second slide, this is really just another way of looking at what we just saw visually in a map. I think if you advance the slide once and then back and forth really quickly here, one of the points I really want to make here is that with this additional functional classification changes, there was close to 4,000 miles statewide, and a majority of that was in the MAG region, where additional roads that were previously local are now minor collectors or otherwise. And that's increased this gap, this place, these places where we don't have raw traffic counts. So advance it once more just to where the chart changes. So you can see there that chunk of the MAG region in gray is increased. So some of the things, the how in how we address these data gaps, a big portion of it is a statewide inventory of continuing to coordinate with the local agencies. We're establishing some statewide guidance and standards and looking at some ways in which ADOT can facilitate some collaboration and some technology, utilization of some other technologies. So we know the solutions are out there. This project is largely just in coordinating these efforts. Next slide. This is just an example of a standard, a guidance document that's been produced. This summarizes the highway performance monitoring system requirements straight from FHWA. We do see in talking to a lot of the locals that there's oftentimes misunderstandings about what the responsibilities are, what the data needs are. And so we hope to clarify some of those things. Next slide. So this here is just a list of some of the relevant subtasks. This project as a whole really encompasses a lot of different things. It's several little projects kind of piled together. The piece that's most relevant right now is this third bullet point in inventorying local agency traffic monitoring activities. Obviously, we've already spoken with many of the local agencies in the MAG region. We've worked closely with some select agencies in getting the raw traffic counts and providing some training in how to get those counts shared with ADOT and MAG. But that third bullet point really is sort of the punchline of the major thing that we're trying to accomplish. I want to maybe kind of turn it to Adam and let him kind of take us through these next couple of slides. Adam Langford, who's also with Works Consulting.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, as Jonathan was saying, one of the big aids in helping us accomplish this undertaking of the statewide traffic monitoring program and guidance is just to understand where agencies are at. How, understanding what the best practices are throughout the state. Starts with understanding what all the practices are throughout the state. So really getting a good idea of what all the different agencies are doing in terms of their traffic counting programs is helpful here. And that doesn't just include whether you are counting or not. It includes, what tools are you using, what equipment you have, what type of data are you collecting, what cycle you're collecting those on, and best specifically where you're counting as well. I'll go on to the next slide real quick. How we're going to begin this inventorying this information is by sending out a survey. It shouldn't take very long to complete, 5 minutes. It only has about 15 slides in it that have to do with just these topics that we've been talking about. But it'll really help us get an idea for every agency's counting program and where ADOT will be able to best support the existing counting programs. Ultimately, with that goal of having, as the last bullet point here says, a hybrid solution. ADOT doesn't want to necessarily, count where a local agency already has a thriving counting program, data collection program. And so really looking to emphasize the management of the traffic counting programs at the local agency level. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So like I said before, the survey, here's the link to the survey. And again, we're going to try and get these out and get this survey URL out in as many ways as we can. But these are just some of the samples of the types of questions that we're asking. Do you contract to your counts? Do you use your agency staff? How many count sites are you counting? Are you counting it on every year, 3-year cycle, 6-year cycle? What kind of combination of count cycles do you have, and what's the duration of your counting? Is it 24-hour, 48, 7-day? Do you have any continuous traffic counting sensors or equipment that can be used to collect continuous traffic counting? And then how do you use the traffic count database system if you do use it, the magtrans.org? And do you currently have the ability and capacity to upload those counts onto that traffic count database system? So again, we want to provide you with that URL. Please, take 5-10 minutes, fill out the survey, and we do intend to follow up with individual agencies, kind of on a one-on-one basis and continue that conversation with you individually. So go ahead and go to the next slide. And I think that's all we had. So again, here's James and Sage's contact information, along with Marissa Beta from ADOT, that, who is managing the traffic count monitoring, or the traffic monitoring group.
And this is Jeff. And again, let me just jump in and encourage you to help get this survey to the appropriate contact. We realize that a lot of you are not necessarily that appropriate, that contact. And, you know, we are eager to work with, you know, whoever's actually managing the traffic count program, and of course, keep other managers in the loop as well.
Thank you very much for your presentation. One thing that I would encourage you is that when you send the link, make sure, and I don't know if this is something you desire, is having just one contact by agency. And you don't want to receive conflicting survey responses from an agency. So maybe each one just to forward it to that specific person so that you get the best responses and they are all responding correctly according to the agency. So I would encourage you maybe to make that clarification when you send the link. Does anybody have any questions? Hearing none, let's please continue. Agenda item number 4. This is the 2020 call for federal funded projects. This agenda item will be introduced by Steve Tate from MAC. Steve, take it away. You're muted.
Thank you. Am I unmuted now?
You are, Steve.
Steve, you're muted.
Steve, you're still muted.
Am I muted now? Okay.
Yeah.
This agenda item addresses a call for projects that we're going to release on July 30th. We have 5 funding programs which we're going to make a call for. And there's also a transit program that I just learned about today, which is going to be for the Avondale, Buckeye urbanized area. I'm not going to discuss the transit one. I'm only going to address the highway side ones. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the 5 programs. They're the PM10 Certified Street Sweepers, the PM10 Paving Unpaved Roads, the Roadway Safety Program, the Transportation Alternatives Non-Infrastructure Safe Roads to School Program, and the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to go through each of the programs in a little bit of detail. The PM10 Certified Street Sweeper Program is purpose is to purchase PM10 Certified Street Sweepers, as it says. Yeah, the funding source is CMAQ. We have approximately 1.4 million. The programming will be in 2021. The requirements to be eligible for thing is it has to be in the PM10 or PM10.5 non-attainment areas for the sweeping. If you're going to replace an existing sweeper, that existing sweeper has to be 8 years, and it has to be a PM10 certified street sweeper. I know in the past people have wanted different kinds of sweepers, but we've never been able to get approval to do that. The application we're going to use is the same type of applications we used last time. It'll be online. We will be sending setup information after the meeting, and we will actually be discussing a similar application in the next item. The selection of project is based on a cost effectiveness score, which is basically emissions reductions divided by federal monies for the project. The street committee will review the street sweeper database street sweepers, but the project is really selected by that cost effectiveness score. An important point here in this thing that's changed from different years is that ADOT will be doing the procurement. They will bid the projects out and deliver them to cities, as my understanding. My understanding also that they will be using HERF rather than CMAQ because essentially the Buy America waivers make it difficult to purchase this PM10 street sweeper with federal money. Okay, that's the first program. Next slide, please. Okay, the next one is the PM10 paving unpaved roads. This one can cover the paving of an unpaved road, paving of shoulders, paving of alleys, can also do curves. The funding available, the programming available is in 23 and 24. Again, to be eligible, you have to be in the PM10 or PM 2.5 non-attainment areas. With this funding, you cannot add through lanes to the project with the federal money. We will be using an online application for the first time for this program. We'll be discussing that later on. Again, we use a cost effectiveness score for selection, and the street committee will review the data. I should also note that there's approximately $866,000 that's required to be spent in the PM 2.5 area. We usually address that once the projects are selected and simply identify that we've met that goal. Next slide. Okay, the roadway safety program. This is a relatively small program and a very new program. Its intent is for doing small safety projects in relative near term. To fund it, we're using a swap of STBGP federal fund for HERF. There's approximately 1.9 million available. The programming is in 2021. To be eligible for this funding, the project should have a recommendation from a study saying that the safety improvement is needed. The study could be a regional safety assessment. It can be from a project assessment. It can be from the agency's own studies. But I think there is a strong desire to have a recommendation from a study. And the proposed safety improvement needs to be compatible with the state and the regional safety plans. The application is going to be a spreadsheet. We're going to house it on the MAG website. When we release the applications, we will give links to people on how to download the application. The review committee for this is the Transportation Safety Committee. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have the Transportation Alternatives, Non-Infrastructure, Safe Routes to School projects. Obviously, it's non-infrastructure, so you can't build anything with it. It's open for high schools and schools that can apply for the funding. It primarily consists of safety studies and purchase of equipment for crossing guards and other individuals who at schools. The funding for it is, I'm sorry, my phone is a little messed up on this one. John's in the way. Just a second.
It's Transportation Alternative Safe Routes to School.
It's $695,000. It's for FY 23 and 24. It has to be in the MAG planning area. And again, we're doing it with a spreadsheet, which you'll have access to once we release the applications. And it's being done by the review party is the Transportation Safety Committee. Oops, I should have done that. Okay, next slide, please. Then we have the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. Samantha reminds me it's always arterial bridge, not bridge arterial. So it is the Arterial Bridge Program. This is funded with STBGP funds that we inherited when the Pinal County jurisdictions became part of MAG. There's approximately $1.3 million available. It's available in FY 23 and 24. The requirements are that it has to be a federal aid highway because I think we're dealing with STBG funds. It has to be in the MAG planning area in Pinal County. Okay, again, we're going to use a spreadsheet for the application form, and the street committee review the applications. I keep on doing this. I keep on changing my phone and think for another slide. Please change the slide, David. Okay, the schedule. This is just a highlight of a few points in the schedule. On the 24th, we're going to send out a call and ask for people to set out accounts. On the 30th of July, we're actually going to really make all the applications available. On August 4th, we're going to have a workshop, or it's actually a virtual workshop in a webinar format. The applications for the sweepers, the paving, and the Pinal County applications are all going to be due on September 10th at 10 o'clock. And I'm also supposed to say, no late applications allowed. They get sliced and tossed and used for kindling for firewood. The other applications, the road safety program and the TA applications are due October 1. The street committee will do its main review of this applications on the 13th. The transportation committee will do it on the 17th of November. And we're hoping to wrap the entire thing up at the regional council on the 20th. There was a fact sheet distributed with the agenda item. It gives you a little more detail on the funding and a lot more detail on the schedule. Madam Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Next slide. Questions?
Thank you very much, Steve. Anybody have any questions? If not,
Madam Chair, if I could just jump in too with a real quick plug. Last year we had gone out for a call for projects and hadn't received enough for the paving category. So once again, I want to push folks to look through their list of projects, think long and hard about what might qualify, what might be a good project to put forward as part of paving of unpaved roads, and help us get that money obligated. So, thank you.
thank you. If nobody has any questions, let's proceed with item number 11, online forms for application. This item will be introduced by Mr. James Azmag from MAG.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm James Azmag. I am one of the software developers at MAG. So I just want to quickly go over, I know some of you guys are pretty familiar with the Call for Projects website at callforprojects.azmag.gov, where we've done the sweeper calls in the past, as well as design assistance. So this year, I'm going to focus on the new stuff that we've added to support the paving call, which is also moving online. If we can go to the next slide. So the first one of the new things that we added that I want to quickly go over, we have a new button on our call details page here where you can preview the fields that are on an application. That was one of the key pieces of feedback we got, is that a lot of times in order to figure out if you want to apply for an application, you need to make one to see what's on it. So this should help. You can take a look at what's out in the application before you set one up and have to make like a test draft or anything like that. So we can go on to the next piece, which focuses on the new feature that we've added specifically for paving to answer a section of an application multiple times. So I know in the old Excel process that you guys used, we had there's like a segment B worksheet that has all those fields on there that you fill out. And then if you had multiple segments that you were paving, you would then proceed to multiple copies of that same worksheet. So if we go to the next slide, what we've done is we've kind of encapsulated those fields which you might need to fill out multiple times while you're applying for paving projects. And then just basically made it so you add more sections to the application as needed. So if we go to the next slide, when you click on that button to add a new section, you'll be prompted to name what your segment is about if you have multiple things to go over. And then on the next slide, when you create it, you'll see that we have all of those, basically makes an extra tab in the top up there of your multiple segments. And similarly, we have a delete button on there if you only need to do one. And then on the next slide, you are also encouraged to rename your sections of the application to be a little more descriptive rather than segment 1 and segment 2. But yeah, that's kind of one of the newer things. The fields inside still get filled out the same way, but this is kind of how we're doing the multiple responses now that we're moving into the online format. If we go to the next slide, the other big thing that's new to the paving call this year online is our online cost estimates. So if we go to the next slide, on your paving application, kind of towards the bottom, you're going to be seeing this screen down here that basically has a summary of your cost estimate, or looks like this if you haven't started one yet. So when you click on that begin cost estimate summary, and then you can go to the next slide. When you click on that, you'll be taken to kind of modal pop-up screen that has all of the sections from the old Excel-based application, kind of in collapsible drop-down areas. So you fill those out the same as you would when previously filling out an Excel-based cost estimate. If we go to the next slide, this is kind of an example of one of these sections expanded. There is a default set of line items that are filled out for you that you just click in the green highlighted area and then fill out cost if it applies for federal aid or not. There's a check mark there. And then if your item is not already in the list, there's a button to add your own line item. If we go to the next slide, that basically presents you with a list of current line items that are already in the database. If we go to the next slide, you can kind of scan through and see if there's something that already fits your description. And then if there's nothing in there, you're also able to create your own from this screen and kind of add to our collection of things that we're storing that way. Next slide. When you are done filling out your cost estimate, you have buttons in the top or bottom right corner that will take you back to the main summary screen. And this updates and kind of saves automatically. So this progress is saved as you fill everything out. Next slide. So this is kind of our view of a partially filled out application. So once you've started one and you're back on the main one, once you've started the cost estimate and you're back on the main application view, you'll be able to see a summary of all of the different areas that you filled out funding for from here, and then the total cost. So that kind of breaks down the new stuff for the paving call. Everything else is pretty similar to last year. And if we go to the next slide, you can always contact myself or anybody else in the Information Technology Division at MAG for help with filling things out online. And then we're also going to be doing virtual workshops, the same that we've done in-person workshops in the past for our calls, so you can get help there as well if you have trouble. But I think that's all I have. I can take any questions if anyone has it, but just a pretty brief overview of the new stuff you can expect to see online this year.
Thank you, James, for your presentation. I do have one though. Is there any way in your applications in which you ask if the local public agency is CA? Because the ADAT review fees are different.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's not highlighted on there. That's a good point to bring up. Thank you. As part of that cost estimate, I skimmed through all of them, but the bottom section is about the different ADOT fees. And there is a drop down there where you can select if you are CA or not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have any questions for James? Look forward to the virtual workshop. So thank you, James.
Thank you.
If not, let's please continue. Agenda item number 12. That is the overview of the CMAQ methodology for evaluating PM10 certified street sweepers and PM10 paving and paved road applications. Mr. Dean Giles from MAC will provide an overview. Take it away, Dean.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Street Committee. With the upcoming call for projects, we wanted to provide an overview of the MAG CMAQ methodologies for evaluating the proposed street sweeper and paving projects. But first, some background I'd like to cover. Next slide. The CMAQ program funds transportation projects and programs that will contribute to attainment or maintenance of the federal air quality standards for ozone, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter. Currently, portions of the MAG planning area are non-attainment for 8-hour ozone, PM10, and PM2.5, and maintenance for carbon monoxide. Next slide. The Federal Highway Administration's guidance includes the eligible activities for CMAQ, and those include purchasing street sweeper equipment and paving dirt roads. FHWA's guidance requires an assessment of the project's expected emission reduction benefits and cost effectiveness to better inform the selection of CMAQ projects. Next slide. To meet the Federal Highway Administration's requirements, MAG developed the MAG CMAQ methodologies. In general, the methodologies quantifies the proposed project's emission reductions in kilograms per day and calculates the cost effectiveness for the project in dollars per metric ton of emissions reduced annually. Next slide. Now for street sweepers, the methodology first calculates the PM10 emission reductions in kilograms per day and applies a weighting factor depending upon if the proposed project is within 4 miles of a PM10 monitor. Then to calculate the cost effectiveness, there's a conversion from kilograms per day to metric tons per year. There is a cost recovery factor added for proposed street sweepers of 8 years, which is the expected useful life of the unit. And then finally, it divides the annualized cost, CMAQ cost, by the annual emission reductions to obtain the cost effectiveness. Next slide. So for the street sweeper projects, these emission reductions are obtained by reducing dust that is re-entrained by vehicles on paved roads. And so generally speaking, the types of projects we see at this time are projects to replace older certified street sweeper projects. And I just wanted to mention that in August 2014, the MAG Regional Council adopted a replacement policy for older certified street sweepers, that the street sweeper needs to be at least 8 years old, recorded 12,000 hours of service, or had been in operation for 96,000 miles. Next slide. So this slide provides the type of information that we're requesting on the electronic application form. And most of you that have filled out the application are familiar with these types of projects or these types of questions. So we'll be looking for these responses to calculate the emission reductions and also the CMAQ funding requested to calculate the cost effectiveness. Then the next slide, please. So here is an example from the MAG CMAQ methodologies for a project to replace a non-certified street sweeper, where there is no increase in the sweeping frequency or the area swept. And so first we're calculating the emission reductions, applying the cost recovery factor, and then calculating the cost effectiveness. So in addition, next slide, please. The call for projects that will be issued later this month will include paving unpaved road projects. These are the questions that you'll find on the new electronic application. So we have things on here like CMAQ funding requested and a description of the project by segment, including length and miles, and average weekday traffic per segment. I won't go through all of those, but generally speaking, those are the types of questions that are requested in the form. Next slide. So with the calculation of the expected emission reduction benefits, this is an example again out of the MAG CMAQ methodologies. And this particular example is for a paving project for 1 mile where the ADT is 120 cars per day. And it's calculating the emissions for paving of the roadway and the installation of the curbs and gutters on both sides of the road, and the addition of access points. So those are the first three lines of the of this calculation. And then we're again calculating the capital recovery factor, where the life is 20 years, and then calculating the cost effectiveness for the project. Next slide. And Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dean. Look forward to the workshop you're going to have. Anybody have any questions? No questions? John, you want to go to item number 7?
Madam Chair, members of the street committee, I might suggest that this would be worthwhile to push off to the August meeting, in which I can also couple it with Mr. Fabiano's question earlier, and we can talk some additional funding context, and I can give additional detail, but I'll give deference to you as chair.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Therefore, we're going to proceed with agenda number 14. Oh, agenda item 13. Sorry about that. That is the request for future agenda items. Please call out if you have a request for future agenda items. If not, please send an email both to Steve and I. And if you have agenda items or topics you would like to bring forward. No? Okay. Let's go to agenda item number 14. This is the time to hear if there are any announcements by our member agencies. Please call out or raise your hand, and please introduce both yourself, the agency, and what you want to discuss. Hearing none.
Madam Chair, this is David Smith, City of Scottsdale. I do have an announcement to make. We are pleased to announce that we have hired a new transportation and streets director. Mark Mayachenko has accepted an offer to begin with the city on August 3rd. Mark, many of you may know, currently is the deputy director for the city of Phoenix. So we're excited to have Mark join our team on August 3rd.
Thank you for sharing that. Any additional announcements? Okay. Hearing none, agenda number 15 is just to remind everybody that the next street committee meeting is scheduled for August 11th. It's gonna be most likely virtual, though the comment says it's gonna be in the MAC offices. So this is just for information. I hope everybody can make it. And let's proceed with agenda item number 16. And this is a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Thank you very much. As always, I really appreciate everybody's time and effort in this, and please keep safe.